Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name's Elly Greeny. I am the Managing Director at Transition Partners. Hopefully you're all aware of Transition Partners. I'm sure there's lots of familiar names already on the list today, but if you're not, we specialise in IT, business change, transformation and digital recruitment. Not only in the UK actually, we have an office over in Berlin and cover the European market as well. But we're really pleased to have you all here today on one of our online webinars. So as a business, we usually run about 30 tech events a year. Due to COVID, we've had to take them all online, which is great because it means people from a little bit further afield can join us. I think we've got people logging in from all across the UK, which is great to see. So we've actually partnered today with ROQ. So this is for our Automation ROQ webinar. So we are going to be discussing all things frameworks, techniques and approaches and tooling today. We've got some fantastic speakers lined up for you. So we've got Stephen Johnson, Nick Dempsey and Graham Hurlston, and I think someone's just emailed through to say is there two Stephens. So will the official Stephen give us a wave?
Stephen wave.
There we go, and then that's Nick at the bottom. So yeah, without further ado, I'll let Stephen get started and learn all about automation today.
Brilliant, thanks Elly. So I'm Stephen Johnson, I'm one of the founders of ROQ. My role today is not to do the clever stuff. It's just to really facilitate the conversation around test automation and the areas that Elly's mentioned really with the guys. So I guess the first thing to do is really introduce who these two wonderful chaps are. So do you want to go first, Nick?
Yeah, I'm Nick. I'm a senior test engineer at ROQ. I've been here for about 3.5 years now. Originally came from like a manual testing background and sort of data transformation, but I've been doing automation since I've been at ROQ.
Graham?
Yeah, and I'm Graham. I'm also a senior test engineer at ROQ, and I've been there for about 3 years now, joined on the graduate program.
Fantastic, nice simple introduction. Yeah, so ignore Nick's name in there. It's I don't know how he's got my name, but it's really, really clever actually. Brilliant.
Got your bank as well.
Yeah, it's an aspiration. You want to be.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure.
Well, first one, let's talk about frameworks. I think they're the ones that we see from a consultancy point of view where organisations tend to struggle with the most, or there's definitely room for improvement for what we see. So again, if we look at we understand the importance of having a really robust sort of test automation framework. So I guess I'll start with you, Nick, as you're on my left. What are the 3 things you think that make a good framework and why?
So I'm going to approach this slightly outside the framework, more from a business side, because these are the questions I always get when we demo. So the main thing that the business is looking for is good reporting. So it's all well and good having a fancy framework, but they want to know why their tests are failing. They want to know it quickly. They don't want to go into lots of debugging time. So reporting is really key for a good framework, beyond all the fancy stuff that it does underneath that. That's always the question we get asked when we demo a framework is what reports do we get out of it? So that's key for me. The next one on the back of that is maintainability. So we want a framework to be as simple as possible. It should do the tasks that it needs to do as simply as possible. So it can be maintained quickly as well, because that's a lot of the overhead of building a framework and using a framework is the cost to maintain it over time as well. Most frameworks that aren't maintained properly are the ones that get put on the shelf and don't get used and don't really offer any value to companies. And the last thing for me is speed and consistency. So the sell of automation is it frees up manual resources and it's quicker than manual resource. So that's exactly what it should do, and it should be consistent as well. There's no, this always fails at this point. You don't want that in a framework, otherwise no one's going to put your trust in it. So speed and consistency is definitely one for me.
Yeah, that's a good one. What about you? Add to that?
Yeah, I think probably the first one for me is a well-documented test tool. I've seen lots of companies now looking for the exciting new tools in the market, and they might save them a couple of minutes to write each of their tests, but if they're not well documented, they're not as mature in their nature. It makes the framework more difficult for somebody else to pick up and maintain in the future. So yeah, just having something that's well documented, just easy for somebody else to pick up. Standards is a big one for me, and anybody who knows me knows this is probably the thing I get irritated most about. Anything like poorly laid out code, language standards not being maintained, just makes frameworks difficult to use and difficult to read. So the team I work with have this drilled into them all the time, so that everything we deliver is in a consistent way. And really also just to back up Nick's comment, easy maintenance. All the framework should be built with maintenance in mind and not necessarily speed of initial scripting. It's really easy to put a time pressure on automation delivery because all you have to do is write it and run it, but it really is more than that. So we need to make sure anything that's delivered for automation can be easily modified if that system under test does change in the future.
Oh, brilliant. No, thanks for that. I know there's hundreds of things we can talk about around frameworks, but it's good to get your thoughts on that. So let's pick up on a few of them. Nick, you mentioned sort of the kind of internal sell, the buy-in of automation within that. I'm sure a lot of the people joining today have kind of suffered with that. What would some of the one of the biggest benefits of actually automation will bring into a business that you should kind of?
Yeah. So the benefits of automation are pretty clear. So once automation is adopted, client benefits you get in are faster feedback on the state of your application, and everything that comes with that speed and cost saving. But we found that you also get a closer collaboration between development, business, and testers. So employing something like BDD in the framework allows more collaboration, so everyone's working together from the same song sheet. And it can also have a benefit to testers not getting stuck in the monotony of regression testing. So it allows them to focus on testing fresh functionality, which definitely keeps things fresh and interesting. I mean, no one wants to be sat doing the same job over and over again, do they? So that automation can take that role of doing the boring jobs and keep things fresh. So it adds a bit to employee happiness and well-being as well, I think.
Right. Thanks, Nick. So Graham, one thing you mentioned there, and you sort of smirked when you said it, but we know you, is around the high standards. Is there any things, you talk about being drilled into the team, but is there what the type of things that you've done to sort of help and support the team? Because I don't think anybody would disagree, it's an important one. But
I think it's just about making sure that the team always feels they can ask for advice or guidance without judgment. We work in a relatively small team anyway, so we're always doing things like code reviews and peer programming to make sure everything that you write follows best practices. Because at the end of the day, we all need to be able to pick up any of our automation solutions that we deliver. So that we all need to get involved in the delivery of everything to make sure nobody goes down the wrong path.
Oh, good. So I guess on the flip side of that, you talked about what makes a good framework. What are some of the horror stories that you said? Because obviously we go to clients and we see we're asked to review, we're asked to look at, we're asked to pick up, usually the debacle in some cases, what's been like, what are the two, rather than going through everything, because I'm sure that's a long list, what are the two main things, or one each, I guess? Nick first?
Following off what Graham just said about standards is where I've seen that that's not been followed, and especially when you've got too many people working on a project. Like a framework can swell at an alarming rate if you have like 6 or 7 people working on the same one, and that design pattern hasn't been implemented properly. So you end up with something that takes longer to understand how it works and how it hangs together than actually spent doing it and maintaining it. But so when we talk about maintenance, it's not even doing sometimes, it's just understanding what it already does and then how to fix it. So you want to avoid that. So yeah, it's just no design pattern, duplicated functionality all over the place, really confusing to understand, and just takes longer to debug the framework than it does to run the test manually, and you're not getting any return on your automation framework.
No, brilliant. What about yourself, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick's absolutely hit the nail on the head there. But one that I cringe at, just because it should be really easy and something that everyone should get right, it's just bad BDD. It feels like the good practices haven't really made it across the industry yet. Only the other day I was reviewing a framework for a team built by one of the largest consultants, one of the largest accountancy firms in the world, who I won't name. And their BDD was awful. It was just all over the place. It was given then and given when. Just really bad, really difficult to read and really difficult to understand.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So Nick, anything else on, so we come towards the end of the framework stuff, what else, anything else you'd move it off?
Yeah, it's picking the right tool for the job. There's no sort of one size fits all approach to automation. I mean, it should be as simple as possible, but you need to pick the right tool. So it should be closely aligned with the skill set of the people that you've got. There's no point using a tool that no one knows how to use if you've got a tool that may be slightly more complicated, but everyone knows how to use it. Then use that one. It makes sense to align it with your skill set. As Graham mentioned earlier, well-documented tool sets. There's no point using the flavour of the month one if no one knows how to use it again, because it's harder to upskill people. It's harder to find resources that know how to work it. I mean, it may take off in the future. It depends how forward-thinking you are, I suppose. But it's all about reducing that maintenance time, so that comes into selection of tool set as well.
So, final question around this. I guess from what you've said, I mean, we talked about frameworks and we recognise the importance, but we also know that not every organisation has that approach. So, Graham, what are the issues that come up if you just do a kind of just script approach? What's the big gotcha?
Well, I think the obvious one is maintenance, and applications they're always being changed, and the UI is one of the most commonly changed elements of an application because it's dead easy to do. But a change in a UI would just completely render your GUI-based automation framework useless unless you maintained it. So if you just script, you're just going to have to end up updating each of your tests separately. So that's why a framework is better, because you can chunk up your code into frequently performed actions or methods, and then you can reuse them. So if that workflow does change, you can just update it in one place.
Right, that kind of makes sense. And I guess from the audience point of view, we've got a real mix of audience and experience, so hopefully that's covered off. And again, we haven't gone into every depth and detail of frameworks, so we can certainly do them in the Q&A towards the end. So if we covered off that, in terms of tooling, now I've been in around 20 years in testing, and I think when I started there was CompuWare, there was Mercury Interactive, and I think IBM might have had a bit of a play in it. So literally it was 3 you had to learn and know about. It feels now like there's 3 every week coming out. And it really is, and it's the name of a vegetable or a vegetable/fruit or animal or something, which is quite funny. But if you were if people on the audience are thinking of changing tools or selecting tools, what are the things that they should look? I know we covered a little bit of this, but what are some of the things that they should look for? I'll go with Graham first this time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, will it test applications you want or might want it to? Not all those tools can do everything, so it's really important that you review the ones you're looking at to make sure they meet all of your needs now and any needs you might have in the future. But also, what is the long-term prospect for that tool being maintained? I mean, like you say, feels like there's 3 pop up every week. I wouldn't be surprised if there's even more than that. But realistically, how many of those will still be around in 5 years' time? So only the top few are going to survive. So you have to make sure that you invest your cash and your time in the right tool that will serve you well for a long time.
Yeah, I think these like proprietary tools, these especially the paid COTS off the like shelf tools, claim they can do it all, but when we've tried to apply it in practice, they're too rigid and lack that flexibility that you need to align it with a real world scenario. So especially record and playback is the one for me where yes, it does have a purpose, but it's for quick recording of a test that you're driving, and it's not meant to be maintained ongoing. Your test is for a short time frame while you're developing something to make it pass, and then you scrap it. That's what they're for. But people try and use them for big maintenance packs or big regression packs, and maintaining stuff that's been recorded and you don't have that control over just leads to a maintenance nightmare. And more often than not, people will re-record the test without investigating why it's failed because they've used a record and playback tool, and that's the easiest thing to do. So where's the value in doing that? So that's the point in still coded frameworks, is you do have that control and you can make sure it's doing what you want, and then you can report on it, and then you know exactly what's going on. So that's it for me.
Yeah, no, well, sometimes there's a real drive for automation, but then forgetting about the testing element, because the idea is we're testing and the assertions are important, as opposed to we can make it work, we can replace a human with a machine, but it's like it's still got to test, hasn't it? So I guess that ties in with that. I guess we talked about the numbers of tools in the market, and again, you guys will use them on projects and they'll vary from client to client, but what's been your sort of favourite tool in the last 12 months, maybe last year, Graham?
I mean, it's not one I've used too much, but I really enjoyed having a go with Cypress. It's got a really good growing user base, so there's plenty of documentation out there. And for me personally, it was really nice to use JavaScript again, having not used it for the last 3 years. And some of the features it's got embedded into Cypress are really cool. So it's got like a built-in test recorder, so it's got the functionality to take screenshots built in. It's not something you need to retrospectively add in. And you can also go back and look at the state of your application as the test ran. And it also integrates really well into CI tools like Circle CI, and it also supports BDD and TypeScript.
Cool. What about yourself, Nick?
So it's not really a tool set as much in tied to automation, and it's probably going to sound really boring, but been doing a bit of development of a product recently and been using MongoDB over SQL. So it's a NoSQL database. It gives you a lot of flexibility to changing your data model on the fly as you're building things, and it's really flexible. It gets away from tables and it stores documents instead of tables, if anyone's not aware of it by now. So it's made my life a lot easier when I was doing that project, and a lot of modern apps are being built on NoSQL, like so getting away from tables. So I've been playing around with that a lot recently, and I found it quite interesting. I don't know if everyone will, but it's good. Yeah.
You're a geek, it's fine, it's good.
Yeah, that's the one.
I guess the other one is a bit more of a jokey question, but again, without giving any sort of amazing business ideas away. If you could magic a tool or a function or a feature within a tool that you haven't seen before, what would it be? I'll go with Graham with this one.
I mean, for me, it's probably not exactly an answer to that question. It's something we've seen before, but isn't really around currently. And that's a really well-maintained open source desktop testing tool. I've mainly been scripting in C# recently, and the sort of tools we normally look to use are things like WinAppDriver and Winium, but they're lacking in maintenance recently. WinAppDriver was supposed to be this big desktop testing solution going forward, but it's just been lacking in support, and Winium's not been updated for a few years now.
What about yourself, Nick?
Well, yeah, I'd echo that. I think desktop automation is always a bigger challenge than web and API stuff. The applications are rarely built with automation in mind. There's so many different frameworks for building desktop applications, and they lack that sort of consistency that you get with HTML and CSS and all the web sort of platform. So we always have to spend more time initially investigating desktop applications before we can say whether or not we can automate them. So a well-maintained set of drivers, like Graham said, that for all sorts of different desktop applications would be an absolute godsend for our roles, but getting that consistency is a big job. Yeah, I don't really know, to be honest. It would be great if it happened though.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That'd be good. There's some good questions coming through as well, but I'll save them to the end. But please feel free to keep asking questions on the way. We'll come to them. So I guess if you come back to our business and what we do, so we go into many clients and we see lots of different types of development, so agile, DevOps, iterative, waterfall, generally a combination of all, generally all within the same project or product stream. Where have you seen the biggest benefit of automation in your experience? Where have you seen where it had the biggest impact? Not so much a client, but in terms of a context.
I think
Graham,
more often than not, yeah, sure. I mean, more often than not in the past, we've seen companies implement automation after the fact, so after they've delivered that solution. And sure, it makes our lives easier because the solution's delivered. It's not going to change as quickly. So it makes automation easier, but it will limit their return on investment. If I look back to one of the projects I remember in particular, it was an agile project, and automation was involved from the start. So we could automate those features as they were delivered, and we could easily report on when new issues were introduced. But it's really important that it's the right agile project to be successful. So if you've got a project where requirements aren't really well defined and they're prone to changing really quickly in between sprints, maintenance can quickly stack up, and it's just going to limit that return.
Yeah, more often than not, automation does seem to come in retrospect, and I think there's this wide held belief that applications need to be completely stable before we can start automating on them. But as Graham just said, that's completely not true. I mean, the earlier you can embed automation in your projects as you're testing, as you're developing, then the bigger the benefit you're going to get, which also leads to an organic growth of a regression pack anyway. So why wait until it's stable to build a regression pack when you've invested all your manual time on making sure it works, when you could do both at the same time, and then you don't have to do that additional task at the end. You've built it over time as you've developed it.
Yeah, no, I see a lot of sort of automation and unit testing, but it's isn't it? It's more than that. I get it. And again, it's building it into the planning as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So the whole approach, the whole strategy as a business, really, where's automation best adopting, and almost taking it product by product line or project by project, is where do we want to embed it and things like that. So I think it makes perfect sense. I guess I think there's a question on this anywhere, but it's one that I've got in mind, is kind of what kind of it fits in with what we just talked about. What kind of coverage should organisations be looking for? Is it, for example, a core business application? Let's assume it can be automated. Graham, I'll ask this one for you.
I mean, ideally, as much as possible. Realistically, you want your core business applications is where you want most of your test coverage, and obviously, automation can really help with this. I've always felt that automation has the most benefit, where you have a lot of scripts centered on your most critical applications, rather than just a few scripts just scattered around the whole of your estate.
Yeah, I know one of the projects you're working on that you've got, I think, is it 100% automation now, which is pretty spectacular. So one of the things that I guess our clients are facing, and I guess more business are facing, is how do you deliver more at pace, and in sort of keep quality up? So what are some of the tricks of the trade, I guess, to doing that, Nick?
Well, one of the things we usually deploy, especially with GUI stuff, is everything really is BDD in the Gherkin syntax. So it allows us to reuse our steps. So we only have to code it once at a certain action once, and then it can be used across all tests. I think when we get down to proper testing, and especially when you're trying to achieve that high coverage, is most test routes are the same, and then they diverge at the end. So Gherkin syntax and any design pattern such as that would allow us to accelerate tests to deliver quickly, and then just do that final bit separately. So there's a lot of reuse, so we don't have to do things over and over again, and that feeds into maintenance as well. The other thing would be parameterize where you can. So make your scripts almost like a template, so we can drive different data in. So we're no hard-coded values or anything like that, because that just means duplication again. A lot of scripting, it starts slow and then it just gets faster and faster and faster because of that reuse. If you start every script from the start, you're going to get no acceleration, basically.
What about yourself, Graham? Thoughts?
Yeah, and having a framework that handles all of those cumbersome tasks for you is massively beneficial. So our test approach sees us make use of underlying frameworks that we've already used and we've developed ourselves and we use extensively, and they handle things like test cleanup. So we never need to be worried about stuff like that. And so when we script, we can just focus on the scripting and use that as an accelerator.
Brilliant. So we talked about quite a few things around the approach, but one thing we're seeing more and more over the last probably two and a half years now is a lot of talk around testing at the API layer. What's some of the benefits of that approach? I'll go with you, Nick. And it's vice versa, it's correct.
So for testing, I mean, speed really is the key one. I think they're also great for especially test data set up and clear down. So if you're performing actions for the GUI, you want to have that data model set up in there to facilitate your testing. You don't want to drive that through the GUI as well, because you'll end up in a scenario where maybe your test fails before it even starts, which is not a good way of looking at it. So being able to drive stuff through the GUI definitely facilitates driving stuff through the API definitely facilitates better GUI testing as well. But also a lot of GUI will trigger API calls, so why not just go directly to the source? I mean, they're a lot quicker. They're consistent. You don't get any timeouts really. Well, you struggle. So you might as well go to the source, test it quicker. You get that even quicker feedback than doing it in the GUI.
Excellent. What about yourself?
I mean, Nick's absolutely right. It's quicker. And if you've got an API testing solution that's well built and well structured, it can be quicker to script, and obviously it is always much quicker to execute. On a recent project, we developed an API testing solution to test an API that had been bolted on to an existing website for which we already had a GUI regression pack. And the time savings were just ridiculous. I mean, the GUI pack took an hour to execute and the API pack took 2 minutes, and that's for a similar number of tests.
No, brilliant. Good. So I guess coming back to sort of wrap it all up in terms of the approach, what are some of the biggest barriers to being automation, being adopted? Because there's a lot of talk around it, and like anything, it needs to be bought into. So what are some of the barriers? I'll go with you first this time, Graham.
Yeah, usually it's budget is probably the biggest issue, and particularly at the moment. So any business that doesn't fully understand automation, it can be quite difficult to understand why spending more initially can benefit you in the long run. We've done studies on projects that we've delivered in the past, and when you look at the kind of agile projects that companies are wanting to run with frequent code releases, the cost savings can be seen in just a few iterations. So you've got a regression pack then that covers all of your base functionality, and then your manual testers can just focus on new features before they then subsequently get automated. So really an automation feasibility study should be a must on every project, thinking about things like how many releases will there be, how long will it take to manually test, how long will it take to automate, and with those figures you can quickly understand how automation actually could be beneficial to you.
Oh, brilliant, really good advice. That. So what about yourself, Nick? Anything else?
Yeah, it definitely requires a cultural shift in the organisation as well. I mean, automation testing requires a certain level of trust because it is just running away from a person's eyes. You don't have that person to sort of blame things on almost. So convincing people that automate solutions offer value can be the biggest barrier. And I've been in demos with a couple of clients just at the end of last year where they'd had bad experiences at previous companies, and that sort of scrutiny and mistrust in automation has been carried over into the new environment. So what we try and do is we have a lot of frameworks that we can spin up demos on their own applications that don't take as long to put together. And we can prove to them how quickly we can do this, how efficiently we can do this, and show them that benefit like firsthand. So, but when poorly implemented automation lingers for a long time anyway in people's minds, so it's important to get it right. So, yeah, it can be implemented badly, and we want to show them that we don't do that, basically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting on the culture one because, I mean, experience says it blocks so much change and stuff just generally. And there's a lot of talk about. I mean, you see a lot of organisations. I think I was at a Gartner conference 18 months ago, and the busiest analyst in the whole world for Gartner was the RPA consultant, the specialist. So that automation concept, thought, theory is seen at that exact level, but when it comes down to getting it in, and particularly around automation for testing elements of it, it feels like unless you've got that real executive sponsorship, and that can be at the CIO or CTO level, it really, really struggles to take off. A lot of organisations seem to experiment and play with it, but it's not really bought into. So you come back to Graham's point around the budgets, it's kind of, yeah, we can see the benefit, but you can't justify it. And in all my years of testing, automation is one that's probably the easiest to justify from a cost-benefit analysis, if you've got the right information ahead of you, especially if it's a long-term application stack. So, yeah, interesting you mentioned culture. That was interesting from your perspective and delivery, that's how you see it as well.
Yeah.
Rant over. But it's the change, but it's our biggest challenge is always to get people to buy into the change. So I guess putting back to the context of where we are in the current world, and some organisations are now going back, genuinely brilliant news to see. With remote working, most of people on this audience will probably be working from home today, I'd have thought. Is there anything else that people should consider, or things that you've noticed in the last 3 months around that remote context, really, that might be change the dynamic of things? I'll go with Graham next.
I mean, as a team, we've really easily adapted to remote working. I mean, most of what we do anyway has been on virtual machines, and particularly in automation, physical devices and using physical machines rarely have any kind of benefit to us. So we're used to that kind of virtual element. And particularly with businesses wanting to cut back on costs, as we keep going back to, It's a great time to review the whole estate and see where costs could be cut, and automation could be the way to do that.
Brilliant. What about yourself, Nick?
Yeah, as Graham said, we're used to working out of the lab in Chorley, so we've got a track record of delivering remotely. So as long as we have access to all the application and everything that we need to access it, it's really just business as usual for us. One thing I personally noticed recently is everything's got a bit more asynchronous, so getting responses back in is taking a tiny bit longer than usual, but that to me says you need to implement it sooner rather than later, because you're removing that sort of manual dependency on someone checking something. If you've got an automated solution that someone can trigger themselves manually or build it into a pipeline or whatever and get that feedback without relying on someone, then it definitely benefits remote working as well.
No, brilliant. That's really useful, because most people will be probably facing that context, and business can't stop, and people are looking at saving costs, and automation might be a way of doing that. So it's a genuine thing. So again, just to give everybody a heads up, just coming to a conclusion now in terms of the couple more questions to cover off. I'm thinking off the top of my head, but please do use the Q&A, and we'll come to them in a short while. So you've mentioned quite a lot on some of the core hints and tips, but I guess, speaking to Elly prior to this, the audience is mixed, and people might want to get into automation and venture into it. I mean, I guess it'd be good to get you guys' thoughts on this in terms of your backgrounds and stuff. So Graham, you mentioned at the start the thing you've come through the ROQ graduate program. What's kind of helped? What are the things, if you were advising someone in where you were 3 years ago, what were things that you'd say have benefited you, things that might be useful for people to consider, look at?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, I joined straight out of university. I had no prior experience of testing at all. I studied a general computing degree, mainly focused on web development. But for some reason, universities, or particularly my university, didn't really cover testing at all. So when I joined ROQ and specifically the automation team, there was a massive mind change for me, as I went from writing in web scripting languages like PHP and JavaScript to learning like Java and C#. But at ROQ, we've got some really great mentors, and with their help and some useful online tutorials, with only a couple of weeks of joining, I built my own Java framework from scratch, incorporating Selenium, Appium, Winium, so I could test a range of applications across various different devices and operating systems. I think my degree probably did help me a little bit, because I kind of had some knowledge about how websites hung together and how they worked. So I knew kind of high risk areas to test, and seeing HTML code wasn't scary to me. But yeah, I mean, ROQ's great because they just empower you to self-develop and really do help you gain more experience. Because only after being at ROQ for a few weeks, I was on my first project for my first client, which was a big high street retailer. And it's just a learning experience. So on that project, I learned a lot. And even though I was new to the team, I was given the scope to make suggestions about our approach and enhancements we could make to that framework. And then recently I've been working for a Magic Circle law firm. And for that client, I've just taken over as the lead automation engineer. And that really does show how ROQ just empowers their graduates to succeed. Because in only 3 years now, I've worked for numerous clients, delivered numerous automation solutions, and now I'm helping to shape the delivery for one of our key clients.
That's so great.
You did, yeah. No, Graham was put forward for the graduate of the year as well, and
so he didn't want to say that. He didn't want to say that, Stephen.
You didn't mention that.
He hates us mentioning that, but I guess what you're saying. I mean, you've had your journey, and you without blowing smoke, you've really taken to that, and it's down to personal attitude to be successful. But I guess what you've really said there is that actually the opportunities are there. There's things you can research. It's getting stuck in. Clearly you've got the right guidance and support, and that's probably there for a lot of people. It's just about building stuff, trying it, experimenting, learning from doing, I guess. So I guess that's the key learning. Obviously, he wasn't paid extra for saying the good stuff about the graduate program, but it's a true story. Brilliant. I'll come over to Nick now.
I came into ROQ with no automation experience. Again, I did a generic computing degree, but I did have manual testing experience. So I had that testing mindset when I came into this place. But as soon as I joined ROQ, they recognised I had technical skills, so I was put straight onto automation projects, and I've been on them ever since. So I've worked across as I said earlier, we tailor our deliveries to the skill set of the client, and because we work for a consultancy, we may be working on a Java framework one day, a Python one, a JavaScript one, a C# one, and then everything that hangs off that, command line, Azure, whatever, SQL. So we get to bounce around a lot of different tools and everything. So we get the backing of mentorship and all the rest of it to support us in that. But there's a lot of exciting stuff, especially because everything's so fresh all the time from delivering to different clients. So it's always a challenge. So I personally believe I've learned the most through doing and delivering. So if anyone's not got into automation yet, I just say find a good tutorial. There's plenty online, such as Udemy do them, but if that's paid, so Guru99, they've got one. Just get one, start automating basic web apps, and then just refine your skills over time. Get that peer review from someone that might know more than you technically or whatever, and then just start doing it. That's the easiest way to get into it.
Get your hands stuck in, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. Excellent. I guess I've embarrassed Graham. So I'm going to start. I'm conscious of time as well, so we've probably done a reasonable amount. There's definitely some questions of it, so I'll hand them over back to you, Elly.
Yeah, we've got loads of great questions. And I wish you'd have told me, Graham, about Graduate of the Year award, because I would have put that on the old flyer when we started populating this one. So yeah, we've got loads of great questions come through, which is amazing. So first question, which comes from Riazi: what is the typical data the business expects from the reports at Nick?
Most people want to know if it's failed and why it's failed. So we do track things like failure over time. So is it a consistent failure, or is it just a one-off, and then we'll monitor it. And we do stuff like a lot of people requests will come in and like, how long does this transaction take? So you're also doing some sort of very high level user interaction performance testing, if you want to call it that. It's not true performance testing. Some people want that, but most people, especially from the business, want to know, is it working, and why is and if it's not, why is it not? So in terms of data, they expect is they want answers more than a spreadsheet of errors or whatever. They want to know what's going on, what you're going to do about it. That's it really. Some people want a little bit more, but it'll be people that really want to get in the weeds of it, and it's not usually business people that want that. It's developers and
Right. Anything else that wants to be added to that, or no? Cool, good stuff. So how do you collaborate effectively when you have multiple automation testers working on a framework? How do you divide the work in a way that someone is not recreating something that's already in place, i.e. functions?
I can take this one again if you want, Graham. Or...
Yeah, sure. Cool.
So when I said the nightmare ones where we had like 8 or 9 people working on a framework, none of this was in place, so that doesn't help. So we now develop frameworks the same way that developers develop the applications. So we use Git, we use proper source control, we build our projects in a proper environment like Azure DevOps, and we treat it like almost like an application in itself. So we all know about branching and merging and all the rest of it. So if we implement a design pattern like the page object model where the function lives on that page, you'd have to be building almost the same functionality at the same time and not speaking to each other. So we have things like Teams and all the rest of it now, so we can collaborate remotely. But in terms of development practice, we use Git, Azure DevOps, whatever, the same that you would just use if you were developing a application.
Yeah, so to pick that one up a little bit more as well. If you're all using proper naming standards as well when you're writing your code, because if somebody just writes a method with a terrible name that makes no sense to anybody else that looks at it, they might end up writing the same function again, but unknowingly. So if you're using proper naming standards, making sure your code is clear, then you can kind of alleviate that a little bit.
Brilliant. Yeah, that clear communication is key. Brilliant. Can adding automation testers reduce the number of overall testers required in a development team? Mohammed.
Technically, yes, but what we would say is your testers in the development team should ideally be doing the automation, but we're not here to. They should be freed from doing boring jobs or monotonous regression testing to do other styles of testing. We're not trying to automate people out of the job. We're trying to ideally allow them to do the human side of testing. So especially like UX stuff and all the rest of it that needs that human interaction. One thing we didn't really mention is no GUI testing should be testing user experience. That's not what it's there for. So technically, yes, but we don't want to see anyone out of the job, and there's definitely jobs that only humans can do.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyone disagree, Graham? You probably want to automate everyone out of the job.
Just depends what you're looking for, doesn't it? I mean, the opportunity there that you could, or you could just redeploy your manual testers to focus on things like exploratory testing.
You said it way better than I meant. Anyway.
So Jakey's messaged in a question for Nick. I'm a manual tester wanting to go into automation in my next role. What do you advise on how to go about this transition? Do you have to write any code, i.e. Python, Java, etc.?
You don't have to. There are tools out there that can help you sort of almost like stepping stones, like something like Catalan. Has a record and playback feature, but you can see what's going on underneath there. So that's good to get your toes wet, I suppose. But we're talking about like coded frameworks. So yeah, Python, Java, C#, JavaScript, all the rest of it. There's definitely tools for people that don't know how to code. And we understand that it's not as easy as saying, learn how to code, essentially. There are tools to sort of bridge that gap. So Catalan Cypress as well has got a decent one for people that are starting out. But then you can go full coded framework solution bespoke to whatever you're trying to test. So it's two ends of the scale, really. I think that answers your question.
Perfect. Is there anyone else got any tips? Because that's a really common question that we get in recruitment, is that a lot of people want to make the jump, but they don't often quite get the support. It's a lot of self-learning, especially when I started in automation. There was a lot of extracurricular sort of learning in how to apply what I knew about coding to a strictly testing automation framework sort of situation. But if you don't have that computing background, just start with basic courses on how to code. Just pick a language. It doesn't really matter. The skill sets that you learn in one should transfer. Like I said, we get bounced around from language to language weekly. So it's knowing how to apply the patterns that you've learned more than it is the syntax of a certain language that is more important. Brilliant. That's great.
The other thing I'd add to that, the only thing I'd add to that as well is don't underestimate the value of that automation, the manual background, because at the end of the day, you're still doing testing. And it's really easy to get carried away in the coding element of that and forget that actually the role that you're trying to do is perform testing and increase coverage and all that. And actually having that analytical mindset coming from a more manual background, it's like, actually, what problem we're trying to solve here? Where does machines help me? So I think that's where the transition works really well. So although there's some mechanics of doing the automation, don't look at it negatively. I think there's a lot of value with manual testers moving into automation for that reason.
That's another complaint that I've heard from people in the past, where they have an automation solution that's been delivered to them, and it just runs and no one knows what it does. And then when we look at it, sometimes it's not testing anything. It's just doing actions without validating anything. So where's the value from that? Is yes, it could do some actions, but it's not checking if it works. It's just doing, and that becomes robotic process automation, which is used to just so humans don't have to do it. It's not a test. It's just an action. So we want to avoid that.
Brilliant. Perfect. Another one from Mohammed. Can you comment on how automated tests can speed up execution and software delivery?
Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, I guess in an agile project, for example, When you get a code release, if you've got an automated pack that's covering all of your existing features, that can just be run overnight. It doesn't work a 9 to 5 schedule, so it'll just run overnight, and then you come in the next morning, you've got your results there, and then you can very quickly turn around any issues back to the developers for them to fix. So you're really getting that quick reporting cycle and getting things fixed nice and quickly.
Perfect. This one's for Graham from Jakey. How much did the ISTQB qualification help you with testing? Good question.
Yeah, I think probably coming from ROQ, I was quite lucky that we've got a really great career support manager who's got a lot of experience in the testing industry. So actually, most of what I've learned has come from her. We obviously do the ISTQB as part of our graduate program. So I've got the qualification. You learn a lot doing it, but do I think that's something you definitely got to have to get into testing? Probably not. But quite a lot of the roles will look for that. But yeah, it's a good qualification to have, not necessarily necessary.
From a recruitment perspective, I think a lot of people, like, ideally they'd like candidates that are ISTQB. So it's interesting for you to say that you don't feel like you need to have that. It's just an added value, another tool to your belt, I guess, isn't it?
I had a manual testing background before I did the ISTQB. So when I did it, it was fairly straightforward because I already knew how to test, basically. So it was more of a rubber stamp. I think it's definitely, if you've never tested before in your life, do the ISTQB course because it gives you that intro. But if you've got a good background of, like, say, a year or two in industry testing, it's about the same, to be honest, in my view. But like you said, if you're recruiting, it is that tick box that you do know what you're talking about. Like, anyone could waffle through an interview and get through, but that just cements it, basically. I personally think I learned more in 2 years testing than I did in the 4 days doing an ISTQB, but I was lucky in that sense that I already had a role in testing.
Brilliant.
I can see you confused.
No, I think it's good. Well, I did. I was reading the next one at the same time, so it might be that. But yeah, I agree. I think it's good, isn't it? Like you say, to give someone that grounding, I think it will be really beneficial. But if you've already got testing experience, it's not essential, is it?
No.
Not essential. And don't also, just from a recruitment perspective on this, if it says that you need to be ISTQB qualified in the job description, that isn't always the case. Like, sometimes people put that on job descriptions, but it's not always the case, and managers quite often will overlook things like that if you've got demonstrable experience, which is the main thing. So, Elly, what were you going to say, Stephen?
It sounds like they want to save themselves training budget, because I guess anybody testing really understands testing will know that the value of it's minimal. I think it's good for people to have qualification because human beings like to feel like they've achieved, like your driving test, like your GC. We're used to that, aren't we? But in terms of practical use of it, it's probably 12 months experience or 6 months experience versus ISTQB. You take the experience every day, I'd have thought you were. So I think if anybody recruiting, I'd say I would put less importance on it. Anybody's listening is recruiting, I really would put less in. I wouldn't rule someone out because they didn't have that. I think that'd be quite remiss to do. I think you miss out on some people because of that. Really do.
Exactly. And every time you do qualifications, they are expensive. If people are out of work and thinking, oh, I can only apply for jobs if I get my ISTQB, but it's important to kind of discuss these things and weigh them up. And it's great to get your insight on that. So that's brilliant. What type of KPIs and metrics do you use to justify to senior stakeholders that the automation testing is working?
Graham? No, for me, it's and I think it was Maxine asking the thing in the question as well. What should the time saving be, manual against automated? I'm going to tie this into the same answer. Is how much does it cost, and how long does it take to deliver in the first place, and how much does it cost to maintain, against how many times is it going to run, and the time a manual person would take to do it. So if it's only going to be run once after you've spent months making it, then it's not worth it when someone could have just sat there and done it that one time. If it's going to be done over and over again, that's where we're looking to implement automation, because it's consistent. It's going to be the same thing that needs to be run daily. The whole shift towards delivering quicker is when you make a change, you want to be able to trigger your tests directly and then push them, if they're validated correctly, push it into live. So that's when automation comes in. So if you're releasing daily, you don't have to have a manual resource testing everything that's come in the past every day. You're not going to be able to release it. So it's all about reducing that release time. So really it's about how much it costs to make in the first place and maintain ongoing versus how many times it's going to be run and what that cost saving will be if a manual person did it each time that run. Does that make sense, Graham?
Yes.
Yes. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing to consider as well, there's a couple of other things to consider as well in that from an organisational point of view is what automation does. It gives you ability to get things out quicker. So the business benefit of being able to get an application out in a day, a week, a change in a day, a week, or whatever, compared to a month because you've got to manually do the regression test. That's the real ROI. It's not necessarily just like, the guys have talked about on a macro level in terms of some of them like for like, but in terms of strategically how organisations look at this, what's the cost opportunity, the opportunity cost really, that you're either missing out on, or secondly, the ways, how do you structure it as well? Because I've known organisations, we've advised organisations before to, how do you look at, if you treat automation as a development project and you treat the regression pack effectively as an asset, you can actually put it onto the balance sheet. So it's not necessarily a project cost, an operational cost. It's more of a capital expenditure, so which you can write off over 3-4 years. So you start looking at this in a clever financial way rather than just a, you know what I mean? And that's when it becomes a strategic conversation, is to say to an organisation, how do we write this off as an asset? How do we treat it as an asset? How do we look at it differently? And then across a stream of programs or project, that suddenly becomes quite compelling as a cost saving. So rather than 100 grand for a project, it's 33 grand for a project in simple maths.
Yeah.
Budgeting wise, you know what I mean? So it's the tricks of the trade really, and knowing how do you position these things as well as a macro level. So there's two sides to that.
Yeah.
And that'll be helpful. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, sometimes we get in from smaller organisations and they want to be pushing for automation, but sometimes the business is a little bit more reluctant. So I think that'll be some really helpful tips there.
Yeah. I was just going to say on top of that, you've also got your standard KPIs like coverage and all the rest of it. So that's the other one, is how much have you actually automated versus how much have you not, and that's a key, because you could say I've automated this application but only covers 50% of the application. You're still going to need pretty hefty manual resource. So that feeds into it as well.
Perfect. So how do you see the test automation in the future? Is it going to be more important and challenging? Will it incorporate other technologies such as ML, if possible, leading the demise of test automation engineers?
I think good machine learning will probably render everyone useless, not just test engineers in the end. We've looked at chatbots before, and although it's just an example, is to test a chatbot, you need that human sort of human intuition really when testing them. So automation, I say anything like that kind of feeds into UX as well. If it's a machine learning tool that is not sort of portrayed to a human at the end, I mean, there's no reason why not. It can't be automation being used, that is. But we found, like, to test a chatbot, you also need to also kind of make a chatbot to test a chatbot. So, and then it needs to understand the nuances of English, basically, to understand if it's a valid answer or not. And it really didn't seem feasible. Feasible, yes. Worth it, no. So it's back to that question of, is it actually worth it in terms of the investment and time that it takes to implement? Most things are possible, but whether you should be doing them or not is a different question.
It might be a topic for the next event.
Yeah.
We could be here all day talking about that, couldn't we? That's a good question. There's another one here. We'll try and get through them as quickly as we can now, because we're coming up to 10 past now, so if we try and shoot through them quick. So Ash said that he's built an automation solution at his workplace and he maintains it where I have time. My ideal position would be to start writing automated tests while development is taking place. However, workloads are often pretty hectic and deadlines are always around the corner, which leads me to often play catch up. Do you have any advice on how best to be in a position where I could implement this without affecting delivery too much? Good question, Ash.
I had a call last week where it's the same thing, where there's a single point of resource in the development team, or they work as groups of testers and developers, but only one person knew about the framework. So I don't know what the situation is at your company, whether you can spread that out into the test team and get everyone working on it, so you can share that sort of responsibility for growing it and implementing it. But I don't know too much. But he was also struggling because there was 2 other testers and they didn't have any experience with automation, and they didn't have time to sort of get involved because of their work restraints as well. So they kind of approached us to see if we could help with that as well, which I think we can. This isn't a sell, Stephen, that's your job. Yeah, so we see different frameworks all the time, and we can definitely embed ourselves in other people's work. That's the sell done. But it's trying to share that workload and not have that key man dependency. So following important, like Graham said, is design patterns and naming standards, so anyone can pick it up that's got experience in testing. The way they approached it was to involve the development team, so they almost feed into the automation testing as well. And then so when they were developing the app, they were feeding into the framework in terms of how it will be tested and located, and then the tester just took on the scripting side. And if you also look at stuff like BDD or some sort of scripting module, so keyword-driven testing, where you just build your library over time, you're not worrying about individual tests. So as you build tests, you're also building assets which will help tests that come in the future. It's important stuff like that. I hope that answers your question.
Great.
Can I quickly add to that as well, because I think it might be important for lots of people. I think organisations need to move away from the idea that there's automated testers and manual testers.
Yeah.
Because I think they're a testing function, and actually we have it in the way we structure our consultancy services, but it's kind of how we've been manifested down the organisation. Is clear you're going to get people who've got more of the development background, who are great for the frameworks, who are great for some of the really technical stuff that needs that nitty gritty. But everybody should be using automation and learning how to script and maintain. And that way you become less on the key man, more that everybody can contribute using automation. So sometimes organisations are geared to have an us and them.
Yeah.
It's just divisive, and I think it needs to, and organisations can make that change. It's whether individuals will, but I think that's a way of moving away from that as well, is make it more encompassing and encouraging, and therefore you'll get more out of the testing team anyway, and deliver more value to your business, which at the minute is absolutely the most important thing, I guess.
Of course, yeah, that's crucial, isn't it? So how do you weigh the importance of manual versus automation? Neil said that he always believes that automation is fed from manual testing. If manual testing is bad, including capturing requirements, writing acceptance criteria, etc., then automation will be bad as well, as it might not be testing what should be tested. What do you guys think?
I think that goes without saying. If your manual testing is bad, then automating it is definitely not going to help. And that definitely is people with a manual testing background are the ideal people to go into automation, because they have that mindset. There's not just a set of actions that need to be replaced by automated actions. It's automated actions with an end goal of testing a certain piece of functionality. So I've lost the question and I've lost the point of my rant. Sorry, so if someone wants to pick it up. It's gone off the thing.
It was weighing up manual versus automation, but I guess
there's a place for both. So it's speed of delivery, and it's how often that automation script is going to be used. Because if it's quicker to do it manually over time. That is, not just once. And then working out whether it's worth it, but you can implement them at the same time. So if we do something like BDD again, that is your test script, and you can automate off the back of that. So if you're only scripting it once, if you have to run that test manually or it's already automated, then great. But you can feed into the automation of that BDD script as you have time to do it and capacity to do it. But you're not writing your scripts over and over again. You have a single source of the truth. So that definitely speeds up and makes things more efficient as well. But yeah, I hope that answers it.
So we got a question now about Cypress. Mior is a big fan. He obviously loves Cypress. There's a comment there. But is Cypress good for UI automation along with C#? If so, what advice would you give on Cypress? And how good is the Cypress tool in maintenance and reusable point of view? How well does it fit into AWS or DevOps point of view as well, as we are planning to rebuild our automation framework? And that's from Ben Carter.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously really like Cypress. My use of it is pretty limited, so I'm not sure how much advice I can really give you on that one. But from what I saw, it was nice and maintainable. It fitted into the sort of frameworks that we normally deliver in terms of being keyword driven. So we could put BDD into it. So we could have that reusability element there, which again will help with maintenance. As to how well it fits into AWS or DevOps, I'm not too sure. I personally used it with Circle CI. But if you're going to rebuild your whole framework with it, just take the advice that we gave earlier. Does it fit everything you want it to do?
Yeah. So it should, from my limited experience with Cypress as well, I can't see why it wouldn't fit into any sort of pipeline tool that you're using. It's just another framework for building tests with a lot of the heavy lifting done for you. So like Graham said, if it fits all your requirements for a framework, then go for it. I mean, it is a pretty cool tool. Just make sure that it is that. In terms of along with C#, I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean that you've got a C# framework and you want to also use Cypress? Because I'd be questioning that one. Just because why? Not because don't do it. Just because I don't understand the full thing. But it sounds like you've got two technology stacks there, and I'd like to know your reasoning. So feel free to contact me if you want to discuss that one a bit more. Yeah, not today, I'm busy today, but tomorrow I'll definitely look at it.
That'd be great. Then there's a couple more questions in the chat then. So Ishmael's asked, automation strategy, can a percentage be pegged on test automation in projects or for an organization?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Can a percentage be pegged on test automation in projects or organizations?
If that's referring to scope, then I'd be more, why do you need that KPI? Yes, coverage is important, but to base all your decisions on meeting a certain percentage when you don't want it to become an exercise of trying to reach that scope if it's not worth it. So that would be my answer to that. Is it worth it to don't have pointless KPIs basically? Especially I've seen ones where it's like records a certain number of bugs in a certain release. It's like, well, that doesn't add value. If the application works and this proves it, then that's great. If it finds 100 bugs, then great, and then fix them. But I don't know. I wouldn't pin anything on a certain number unless
you wouldn't say
it feels like more like a business decision, like a business. Someone said, I want to automate this app completely to get rid of manual people, when they're losing focus of you want the best application possible at the cheapest price and the most efficient way. That's the way I look at automation anyway.
Agreed. That sounds great.
An interesting one. We see this a lot where the big outsourced deals are in place where there's an SLA or a KPI or a contractual obligation to have a level of coverage that's automated. And whenever you investigate what that is, when you look at it, and I think Nick alluded to the point earlier, is it's actually really low value. It's not adding the value. So if it's 60% coverage, it's not covering 60% of the most important areas of the application, because the application is moving all the time. So what you find, it's a legacy type thing that's just done once it's never maintained, it's never, so they become a millstone really around the neck of the contract really. So we've hit our KPI with our SLA, but it's not delivering the value. So you should measure it on what value, as Nick alluded to, what value is it giving to the business? So if it's 100% of all a new functionality of, what is that metric? Think about the KPIs probably a little bit smarter than just a number. I know one of our clients has got 60-70% coverage in the mix for and it works for them because he thought about it. They're not attaining 100. They're not doing. It's a standard they're aspiring to. Not every project will hit that, but it's an aspiration. Whereas a KPI or a metric sometimes can be just a tick box exercise that. Well, why don't we do 90 on this? Well, we've hit the SLA. Yeah, but let's do 90 because it needs it. It'll deserve it. So it's about
no real value.
Yeah, so it's horses for courses, I guess. Think about the metrics and not just numbers, I think.
Good point. This one might be for you actually, Stephen, I guess. Are your best practices and standards documented, and can we have a copy? And what do you use for BDD? No. That's from Maxine.
You can't have a copy. No, absolutely not. The guys have got standards we train our teams on, but obviously we sort of just share and give them out. I appreciate we try and do things like this to share best practice, and it's so wide, isn't it? And as a topic, enormous, so you can't really share everything.
I'd say they're not even our best practices; they're just industry best practices. Coding standards are not ours. They look at the coding languages best practices, and then we just follow design patterns that are tested and proven. Like the obvious one is the page object model for GUI automation. It's not our best practices. It's definitely industry standard, and that means that if someone comes into ROQ, we're not expecting them to know exactly how we work because we've got our own ROQ way of doing things. It should be standardized across the industry, which isn't always the case, but yeah, we do our best.
Good stuff. I'm just trying to work through this. Want to make sure we get everything covered. Maxine mentioned about smoke testing. I don't know if that's a question.
Yeah, I saw that. I didn't. Do you want to elaborate?
I'll see if there's any more in there. That might. Jay Ashery says, do you have a checklist for automation assessment that can be used from a delivery perspective for different types of projects?
It differs from if this is like delivery sort of sign off and making sure that it's delivering value, that's just something that comes over time. And because we work for different consultancy, so we work with different clients all the time, it kind of depends. That's sort of business driven more than us. So some people want to see their test running a certain number of times, but before they class it as done in the first iteration, I mean, it'll continually evolve. That's something we kind of see. Some people want more evidence, so we really only capture evidence if something's gone wrong. Some people might want evidence like for every single test, which they take the overhead for that. It's just, it depends really on the client, I'd say. But there's no real fixed checklist, I wouldn't say. We saw it comes out of that planning stage at the start of the project.
Perfect. Probably this will probably have to be the last question, I think, for the day before we round everything up. But if anyone has got any questions, they can always get in touch and we can forward those on and make sure they're included in the next one, the next episode. Can robotics and automation merge and be a flexible service? Again, this is all the future stuff, so maybe
we're talking automation robots. Is that what we're talking? Don't know.
It's an interesting one. I've had conversations with clients who are looking at RPA to do test automation, and my initial reaction was no. I don't think, from my understanding of RPA, if that's what's around robotics, I think the two. It feels like RPA feels more like a whim runner, a test tool of the 90s. They give the front end rather than the clever automation, which is at multi-layers of an application and the kind of coverage elements. That's
Graham. Let me jump in. Graham, didn't you look at something that automated a finger press on a keyboard, a keypad?
Yeah, exactly. So one of our clients.
That's what you mean by robots, like something actually doing this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
On a chip and pin machine. Yeah.
So there's a solution out there that is using a robot finger to do interactions on a physical device. So you've got two things. You've got RPA and you've got actual Terminator robots out there somewhere.
Maybe this is for the next time then. We'll cover the next one about the future. Give us a bit more time to look into it and come back with some ideas, because we are running these test events as a series, so there will be one coming up. They're usually about every 4 weeks, aren't they, Stephen, that we've been partnering for these?
We've been good.
Yeah, so we've got some great topics for the next episode. So thank you so much to all the speakers for your time. Graham, Nick, Stephen, yeah, been fab having you on. If anyone has got any questions, definitely get in touch with ROQ. So they're UK-based, world-class leading test lab. I'm sure they can help. The guys have shown their knowledge today, so they'll be able to help with any queries you may have. Thanks so much to everyone for tuning in during your lunchtime break today. We've had a really good attendance. That's fantastic, so thank you very much for you all. Hopefully you'd be interested in attending more of our upcoming events, so feel free to just follow Transition Partners on LinkedIn. We post all of our events on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, but mainly LinkedIn's really the best one, or follow us on Eventbrite to keep in touch with our updated events. We have actually got a seminar on Thursday evening. We've got a webinar, and we've got 4 different speakers, UK tech leaders, talking about what is next regarding COVID and setting up your workforce as we move back to office, and the next norm, what that looks like for everyone. So if there are anyone hiring managers, I guess more specifically, it'll be more interest to you guys, feel free to sign up. I think last time I checked, we had about 3 or 4 spaces left, maybe 5. So feel free to register your interest. But definitely, thanks so much to guys for taking your time out to speak to us today. It's been fantastic. And automation rocks.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.